He wasn't just a prisoner, he was the king of the prison, running a criminal empire from a luxury cell with the warden on his payroll and a female guard as his personal lover. This is the story of how one man turned his death sentence into a reign of terror from behind bars. In the shadow of the American justice system, there are stories that defy belief. Tales of shadow rulers who, despite being behind bars, command powerful underground empires. This is one of those stories. It's about a man who used every trick in the book to manage a criminal network from within the cold, concrete walls of a county jail. This is the story of Zachary "Zack" Thorne. Inside the Cuyahoga County Correctional Facility in Cleveland, Ohio, Zack Thorne was less of a convict and more of an emperor. He could summon storms with a phone call and make demands that were met without question. He didn't sleep on a cot in a cramped cell. He resided in a furnished apartment suite, complete with modern appliances. His power was so absolute that female correctional officers willingly became his mistresses, catering to his every physical need. Even the warden of the facility, a man sworn to uphold the law, bent to his will. Most outrageously, Zack Thorne, a man sentenced to death, managed to have his own execution order rewritten. Who was this man? And how did he amass such terrifying power? Our story begins on October 19, 1992, in the Kinsman District of Cleveland, Ohio. A local mob boss named Marcus Marco Vance was brutally beaten to death with clubs by a rival gang. The attackers were not just aggressive, they came armed with shotguns, knives, and other deadly weapons. Alongside Vance's body, his right-hand man, Theo Franklin, lay severely injured. When questioned by police, a battered and bleeding Franklin pointed the finger at one man, Zachary "Zack" Thorne. Zack Thorne was no small-time hood. He was a notorious figure in Cleveland's underworld. Born in the Kinsman District in March of 1963, Zack was, by all accounts, never a good kid. It was as if he were born with a devil on his shoulder. Throughout his school years, his volatile temper led to constant fights. His solution to every problem was a fist. A minor disagreement in the hallway would escalate into a full-blown brawl. His primary ambition wasn't to learn, but to dominate his classmates. The other students learned to give him a wide berth, their eyes darting to the floor whenever he passed. Teachers were at their wits' end. Parent-teacher conferences were frequent but fruitless. This only fueled Zack's arrogance. He thrived on the fear he inspired. Zack dropped out of school after the 4th grade, ostensibly to work on the family farm. But he found the hardship of manual labor even more unbearable than the structure of school. It wasn't long before he was a professional loafer, a permanent fixture on the street corners of his neighborhood. He dabbled in petty theft, but the local community, terrified of his violent retribution, turned a blind eye. This silent acquiescence only made him bolder. Arguments and fistfights became his daily routine. In March of 1979, a 16-year-old Zack Thorne was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention for a stabbing. 2 years behind bars did nothing to reform him. If anything, he emerged more audacious, more committed to a life of crime. Soon after his release, the Cleveland Municipal Court sentenced him to another 2 years, this time in an adult facility for aggravated assault. He was only 20 years old. Perhaps 4 years of incarceration finally taught him something. When Zack was released in 1985, he seemed to have a new perspective. He was no longer consumed by the endless cycle of violence. Instead, his focus shifted to money. In that era, entertainment options were limited, and nightclubs were one of the few places for people to unwind. Zack saw an opportunity. After studying the scene, he partnered with 3 brothers, the Gallo siblings, to open a nightclub called Stairway to Heaven in Cleveland's burgeoning industrial valley. The profits weren't spectacular, but it was a legitimate business. However, the Stairway to Heaven was still a nightclub, a magnet for trouble. Rival crews would often send their thugs to start fights and disrupt business. With his fiery temper, Zack couldn't just stand by and watch his investment crumble. To protect his turf, he began to build a crew of his own, a team of enforcers to act as security. In just a few years, Zack Thorne's gang became a dominant force in the local scene. No one dared to challenge him. His crew grew, and the nightclub flourished. Soon, that single club expanded into a small business empire. But in the underworld, success breeds jealousy. Zack's rise caught the attention of the established mob boss, Marcus Marco Vance. Initially, Vance just wanted to put the upstart in his place, to teach him a lesson, but Zack wasn't intimidated. In fact, he saw the conflict as a chance to elevate his own status, to solidify his reputation in the criminal hierarchy. This led to the fatal confrontation mentioned at the beginning of our story. Zack Thorne, leading 7 of his loyal soldiers, clashed with Marco Vance's crew. In the ensuing chaos, Zack lost control and beat Vance to death. This act was a point of no return. Knowing he had crossed a line from which there was no coming back, Zack fled the country to escape the law. A year later, thinking the heat had died down, he quietly slipped back into Cleveland. It was a fatal miscalculation. Almost immediately upon his return, he was spotted, arrested, and charged with murder. In April of 1995, the Cuyahoga County Superior Court found Zachary Thorne guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death, stripping him of all civil rights for life. Facing the ultimate penalty, Zack appealed the verdict. This was the beginning of his dramatic and audacious career as a master manipulator. To save their leader's life, the remaining members of Zack's crew launched a frantic, multifaceted campaign. They leveraged every contact they had, reaching into both the criminal underworld and the corridors of power. Eventually, they uncovered a crucial piece of information. A prisoner incarcerated in the same block as Zack was rumored to be hiding a secret about a series of unsolved, high-profile crimes. If Zack could get this information and feed it to the authorities, it could be his ticket off death row. His life was a whirlwind of violent events and high-stakes decisions, often with devastating consequences. We will now see if Zachary Thorne can use this sliver of hope to trade information for his freedom, or if he will finally face the ultimate punishment the law demands. His story is not merely a tale of crime and punishment, but a deep exploration of the lengths a person will go to survive in a world filled with traps and temptations. After extracting every last detail from his fellow inmate, Zack played his hand. He relayed the critical information to the authorities as planned. The police investigated the tip, and it checked out, leading to the resolution of several cold cases. In light of Zack's meritorious cooperation, the court re-evaluated his case. They determined that his assistance constituted a significant contribution to justice and decided to show leniency. His death sentence was commuted, replaced by a sentence with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum term. The final judgment decreed that Zack Thorne would serve his time at the Ohio State Penitentiary. However, at that moment, Zack was diagnosed with tuberculosis. This meant he had to be temporarily housed at the medical wing of the Cuyahoga County Correctional Facility. This delay proved to be a pivotal moment. Zack realized that all the connection, all the influence he had painstakingly built over the years were concentrated in Cleveland. If he were transferred to a state prison elsewhere, he would be isolated, powerless. He knew that if he was going to serve time, it had to be in Cleveland. Once again, Zack Thorne activated his network. He made contact with the deputy warden of the Cuyahoga facility, a man named David Evans. Evans informed him that the only person who could authorize him to serve his entire sentence locally was the warden himself, Samuel Price. With Deputy Warden Evans acting as the middleman, a meeting was arranged. To secure Warden Price's favor, Zack dispatched a trusted subordinate to handle the negotiations. This associate discreetly handed Warden Price an envelope containing $5,000 in cash and formally requested that Zack's transfer be canceled. Warden Price saw the potential for a very profitable relationship. Without hesitation, he agreed to the request and instructed Evans to handle the necessary paperwork. Just like that, Zack Thorne was officially assigned to the Cuyahoga County Correctional Facility for the duration of his sentence, exactly as he had wished. To improve his quality of life behind bars, Zack's next move was to gift Warden Price a newly renovated 800-square-foot condominium. All he asked for in return was a more comfortable living arrangement. Under Warden Price's personal direction, Zack was moved out of the general population and into a private two-room suite. It was a far cry from a typical prison cell. The suite was furnished with a plush sofa, a color TV, a refrigerator, air conditioning, a VCR, and other amenities. Most importantly, a private telephone line was installed, allowing him to communicate with the outside world. With these resources at his disposal, Zack Thorne could run his business empire remotely. His life was not hindered by his incarceration. In many ways, it became even more comfortable. It wasn't imprisonment, it was a coronation. He was the king of the castle. To avoid raising suspicion during official inspections, Zack's suite was equipped with an internal intercom. Whenever ranking officials were scheduled for a tour, a guard would give him a heads up. He would then quickly return to a standard cell, and the charade of a fair and equal system would continue. This special treatment gave Zack an unparalleled status among the inmates. They all followed his orders. If someone displeased him, a simple nod was all it took for his enforcers to educate the offender. Inside the prison, he even launched a new enterprise, a parole for pay scheme. For the right price, he could arrange for an inmate's sentence to be reduced. Over the years, he facilitated sentence reductions for numerous prisoners, a venture that generated massive profits for both him and Warden Price. Around this time, prisons across the country were experimenting with self-sufficiency models, creating internal businesses to offset costs. The Cuyahoga facility established 4 such work programs. Warden Price, knowing Zack's business acumen, saw another opportunity. He appointed Zack Thorne as the chairman of the Infrastructure Rehabilitation Committee, effectively putting him in charge of the prison's business operations. Zack's talent was undeniable. Even with the limited information flow of a prison environment, he used his single phone line to secure numerous lucrative contracts for the prison's businesses. To maintain his cozy relationship with Warden Price, Zack gifted him another $20 in cash. Price happily accepted the money, slapping Zack on the back and assuring him, "Anything you need, you come to me." But the story gets even more insane. During his sentence, a married female correctional officer at the facility, after witnessing Zack's power and influence, became infatuated with him. She initiated an affair, willingly becoming his prison mistress. This guard would frequently use her night shifts to sneak into Zack's private suite, where they would spend the night together. The sounds emanating from his room became an open secret among both guards and inmates. Zack Thorne's life in prison was, by any measure, extraordinarily comfortable. But no matter how luxurious the prison, it was still a prison. Zack was still a convict. As the end of his minimum sentence approached, he asked Warden Price to help him get his sentence reduced further. Unwilling to lose his personal cash cow, Warden Price convened a meeting with Deputy Warden Evans and the captain of the guards. They devised a plan. They would falsify Zack's prison record to portray him as a model inmate. According to these fabricated records, Zack had demonstrated outstanding performance throughout his sentence. One particularly heroic and entirely fictional entry stated that on May 5, 1997, Zack Thorne had bravely led a group of inmates to fight a major fire in the prison workshop, single-handedly preventing a catastrophic loss of property. In reality, a fire had occurred, but Zack had merely stood in the back of the crowd, watching from a safe distance. Warden Price submitted this file of falsified commendations to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. The gamble paid off. A month later, Zack Thorne's sentence was successfully reduced from his original term to a fixed 17 years. Furthermore, thanks to his extensive network of contacts and a steady stream of bribes, Zack obtained the privilege of leaving and entering the prison at will. For him, the prison walls were merely a suggestion, not a barrier. Before the new year in 1998, to express his gratitude to Warden Price for saving his life, Zack hosted a lavish party at a famous hotel in downtown Cleveland. At the party, he presented Price with another envelope, this one containing $40,000. During the subsequent period of his incarceration, Zack became even more brazen. Coming and going from the prison became routine, and during his excursions, he made no effort to hide his activities, continuing his criminal operations in the city. Warden Price, in order to keep the bribes flowing, turned a blind eye to all of it. His only rule was that Zack had to be back inside the prison by morning roll call. While enjoying his freedom on the outside, Zack received a call from Warden Price, who needed another injection of cash. Zack immediately agreed and met the warden at a high-end hotel in Cleveland, where he generously handed over $30,000 in cash. As always, Price accepted the money without a second thought. After the new year, to repay Zack's generosity, Warden Price assembled a team of prison staff to fabricate more documents. This time, they secured Zack the prestigious state-level Active Rehabilitation Award. With this new honorific, Zack Thorne once again successfully petitioned for a sentence reduction, shaving his 17-year sentence down to 15. Through money and power, Zack not only had complete control of the network inside the prison, but also managed his outside organization with perfect order. During his frequent trips out of the facility, he quickly reorganized his street crew, once again stirring up trouble across Cleveland. From extortion to assault, his gang's operations expanded rapidly. As his power and wealth grew, Zack's psychology began to shift. His patience wore thin. He started to crave complete and total freedom, to return to society without any restrictions so he could lead his gang in even bigger ventures. With this goal in mind, he approached Warden Price with a new request, to grant him medical parole. Upon receiving the request, Warden Price quickly gathered his subordinates to brainstorm. They settled on a bold strategy. Zack Thorne would feign a severe mental illness to qualify for release on medical grounds. In March of 1999, the performance began. Zack started acting erratically inside the prison, including randomly assaulting other inmates to create chaos and build a convincing portrait of a man suffering a psychotic break. Warden Price and Zack worked in close coordination, manufacturing evidence of his supposed illness. They obtained the brain scan of a patient with a real brain tumor and simply swapped the patient's information with Zack's diagnostic records. Just like that, Zack Thorne was officially, though falsely, diagnosed with a brain tumor. The prison administration then bribed staff at an Ohio State Forensic Psychiatric Center to produce a report. The official conclusion stated that Zack Thorne was suffering from post-traumatic psychosis and was temporarily unfit to continue serving his sentence. Zachary Thorne now met all the legal criteria for medical parole. He casually walked out of the front gates of the Cuyahoga County Correctional Facility a free man. However, just 2 weeks later, he was back to his old ways. He got into a dispute at a sauna in a Cleveland suburb, which escalated into a shooting. Zack used a shotgun to kill one person and severely injure another. After the murder, Zack knew the situation was critical. He immediately changed his name and went into hiding in a rural area on the outskirts of the state. But his luck had finally run out. During a nationwide crackdown on organized crime, a dedicated task force tracked him down. Zack Thorne and the key members of his gang were arrested in March of the following year. The Cuyahoga County Superior Court once again sentenced him, this time with no room for manipulation: death, with the sentence to be carried out immediately. Perhaps even then, at that final moment, Zack held out hope that someone, somewhere, could pull strings for him. He stubbornly refused to name his co-conspirators within the prison system. However, under the direction of a high-ranking official from the state's Attorney General's office, investigators made a crucial decision. They transferred Zachary Thorne from Cleveland to Columbus for interrogation. It was a new city, a place where his network of influence meant nothing. In the unfamiliar territory of Columbus, Zack Thorne was completely isolated. There was no one left to help him manipulate the system from behind the scenes. Slowly, his psychological defenses began to crumble. Finally, under immense pressure from seasoned investigators, Zachary Thorne broke. He confessed everything. He detailed the years of corruption, naming Warden Samuel Price, Deputy Warden David Evans, and the other justice system employees who had been on his payroll. In 2003, Zack Thorne was sentenced to death at his initial trial. He appealed, defiant to the end. However, all subsequent appeals were rejected by the Ohio Supreme Court. By law, 4 months later, Zachary "Zack" Thorne was executed. Samuel Price and his co-conspirators were charged with facilitating a prisoner's escape, accepting bribes, and a host of other crimes. They received prison sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The Cuyahoga County Correctional Facility underwent a massive overhaul. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. Zack Thorne's actions posed a grave challenge to a society governed by the rule of law. From a troubled teenager to a prison kingpin, his life was a series of dramatic, dark turns. His story not only exposes the corrupting influence of power and the toxic interplay of criminal forces, but also serves as a stark warning to any soul that has lost its way in the darkness. The tale of power, greed, and the ultimate collapse of a criminal empire built within prison walls is not just a powerful indictment of corruption. It is proof that while the wheels of justice may grind slowly, they grind exceedingly fine. The life of a man who once called the shots ended as nothing more than a footnote in legal history, leaving for posterity a profound lesson on the value of fairness and the absolute necessity of a transparent legal system.